right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Nick and Joe show. I'm Nick. He's Joe. He is in a very comfortable looking office, and I am at, I'm in a comfortable place too, up here in Sioux Lookout. I just, so Joseph, tell me, how was your week this week?
Well, it's Wednesday, so far I'm surviving. Um, it's still waiting for the hot weather to hit.
It was in the lower 80s today here in Sioux Lookout.
I don't know what that works out to in Celsius.
Who cares?
Yeah, I know. Well,
72
Nick.
is room temperature, so go from there.
Okay, so the problem. Okay, so it was probably hotter in Sioux Lookout than it was in Ottawa,
Probably.
or maybe not. I don't know, but we've had this exceptionally cool June. June was very cool. It was a very cool spring here, and we just got our air conditioner fixed. Thinking, okay, well, we're heading into July, and we might as well get everything fixed up, ready for the summer. And the truth is that so far we've had the air conditioning on. If we've had the air conditioning on for 10 or 11 days, maybe that's as many days so far this year. And so I'm waiting to see how that's going to show up in the climate catastrophist data, because what happens is, Nick, that every time the weather is cool, they tell you, oh, that's just the weather, it doesn't indicate anything. But when the weather is hot, you have a heat wave right away. That's a sign of climate change and a climate emergency. So anyway, there you go. Nick, you're writing something down. You keep forgetting. We're not this is video now, man.
Yeah, I know, but I can still take notes while I'm listening to you.
Okay. You're absolutely entitled to take as many notes as you want.
Believe me, when you get to my age, you need notes. Just ask Joe Biden.
I don't think notes are helping, Joe.
You know what's funny? I was watching him read from a teleprompter. I forget what group he was talking to, but on the teleprompter they have little cues, right? Like when to pause, when to use a quote, and then he's reading this line, and then he reads out, repeat the line again. He just kept going. He didn't realize he's not supposed to read that. He's supposed to repeat the line he just said.
Now you see, that's a firing offense. No, it's, listen to me. As somebody who uses a teleprompter from time to time for different occasions, and who's trained people on teleprompters, you don't assume that the person's going to read the instructions. You just spell it out. Okay, if you want the person to repeat the line, you repeat the line in the teleprompter, and you tell the person who's using it whatever it says. That's what you read. But a person who used to stage manage their speeches themselves was Winston Churchill,
Yes.
and his speeches. So what he would do is he would dictate them, and he would hold, and we've probably talked about this before, Nick. So he used to memorize his speeches, and then one day he was giving a speech while he was still a young MP in the House of Commons in London, and in the middle of the speech he forgot it. He forgot what was left. So he ended up, basically sitting down and couldn't finish his speech. And at that time, when people actually paid attention to what people were saying in Parliament, it was big news. Churchill collapses in Parliament, etc. Even though, he didn't collapse. But so from that point on, he made sure that he had his speeches notes all the time, but not just notes. Now, you hear all the time people who are teaching public speaking, they always say, never read your speech. You have to just make bullet points so that you're speaking more or less extemporaneously to the audience. Okay.
Right.
And it sounds more natural, but Churchill didn't do that. He continued to do his speeches verbatim, and he had them typed up in special type and arranged in a special format. So rather than regular letter size paper or legal size paper, it was more like I don't know what it is. I want to say A5, but I could be wrong about the technical term. But it was sort of like half of regular size paper, of letter paper, and then he would have this speech, and it would be laid out. They used to call it Churchill's Psalms because he'd have it laid out like you would find the Psalms in a
Right.
Bible, and then what he would do is he would number the pages, but instead of stapling them, he'd get a one-hole punch. He had a one-hole punch, and he would punch the speech, and then he'd tie the speech with a piece of string. I don't know why, but because it's not like staplers weren't invented, right?
Yeah, they've been
But
around a
that's what he
long time
did.
before that.
So anyway, long and the short of it is, getting back to teleprompters and cues, etc., is that what he would do is he would actually write in stage management instructions. So for instance, he would have he would read his speeches, but he didn't want people to know he was reading the speech, so he would read it, and then when it came to something that he wanted to quote, even though he was always reading the speech in the first place, he would take his regular glasses off, put his reading glasses on, and then read the quote from his notes, and then switch back to regular glasses again, right? Just for the effect. And he would have like pause for applause, and things like that, right? So
Well, he was considered one of the great orators of, I'll say, the last 300 or 400 years for a
sure,
reason, and this is all part of it. He was a master at his craft.
sure.
Um, he was a. I'm not going to call him an actor, but he certainly knew he was on stage,
Well,
and
he
he
was,
certainly.
of course, he
Sorry.
was an actor. And if he was alive and you put that to him, I think he would probably agree with that.
All right, okay. But because he knew that he had an audience he was playing to, not in a disingenuous way with simply somebody else's words coming out of his mouth.
Right.
He was the author of everything he said.
Yes.
So that's what that to me that's what differentiates him from an actor, okay? Or a some kind of performer. He was performing, but it was his own material.
Absolutely.
It's like a really good comedian, right? They write their own stuff and it just flows because they know it so well. Ronald Reagan was another one who felt that way and behaved that way. And
Yeah.
those two are, very,
Although,
very powerful communicators. Now,
although Reagan used a teleprompter.
he did,
And
but he
here's an interesting thing about Ronald Reagan. We could do a whole show on these little tidbits. Okay. So Ronald Reagan wore glasses. And
did.
yeah, but you
I
never
don't
saw him
remember him
wearing,
wearing
well,
glasses.
in some of the older shots of him,
Yeah.
when he was still doing movies and that, you'll see him sometimes, in public wearing glasses.
Huh.
His problem was, okay, that so that he started wearing contact lenses, but if he wore contact lenses, he couldn't read properly, right? So, how he solved that problem was he would wear one contact lens to be able to read, and the other one he didn't put a contact lens in so that he could actually see the audience, or vice versa.
Yeah, that I had
So
no idea.
yeah, so Ronald Reagan, when he was doing speeches, wore one contact lens so that you didn't know he was wearing glasses. But just to go back to Churchill, I mean, it's he was, people know Churchill as a politician.
Yeah.
Okay, what they don't realize is that he was a tremendous historian and an author, and in fact, his main line of work was writing. In his
Uh-huh.
day, he was the highest paid journalist in the world, and so yes, he made a name for himself as a politician and as the leader of the free world during the Second World War. But a lot of people don't realize that his main profession was as a writer. And he wrote, I think it might have been two, but at least one novel. But everything else was either newspaper, magazine articles, or historical or histories. He wrote and not only that, but Winston Churchill actually won one year the Nobel Prize in Literature.
Yeah, he did, and it was for his um, 5-volume work on World War II.
I believe it was his history of the Second
I've
World
read
War.
some of it. It's a like if you're going to read it, the whole thing, you're going to spend a lot of time doing it. And one thing that made me realize when I'm reading it, because it's written from his perspective, but I
Right.
would not want to have been one of his generals during World War II. He was. You want to talk about micromanaging? Holy mackerel!
Well,
But he was the right guy for the right time. Now,
Yeah.
before you go on, Joseph, John, could you put across the screen what the phone number is? I've got somebody in the chat room asking for it. So we'll get that done so that they can call if they choose. There it is. It is. I know somebody's going to be happy now. All right.
So Churchill
go ahead.
was. I don't know that it's fair to say he was a micromanager. I think it's fair to say that he stuck his nose into everything. I mean, the guy was just a Renaissance man.
He was.
But if you and his generals, senior generals, were during the war years, were absolutely exasperated with him quite often. And Alan Brooke, who was his chief of staff for most of the war, from about, I can't remember what year now, but until the end of the war, wrote some very unflattering things about Winston Churchill in his diaries. But afterwards, he basically repudiated all of the criticisms, and he said, the truth about Churchill was that he would take a point of view, and he would argue for his point of view vociferously, doggedly, tenaciously, whatever word you want to use, adverb you want to use. But in the end, he could be convinced. And quite often his generals would argue with him, and to the point where, that they convinced him that they were right. So it wasn't so much that he was a micromanager. What he was he was a very demanding manager. He demanded that his subordinates prove to him, demonstrate to him that what they wanted to do, if it was contrary to his feelings and his beliefs, that they had to prove to him satisfactorily that their way was the right way. And they often did. But what was exasperating, as I understand it, was that they had to go through this process of arguments and, point and counterpoint. And Churchill was well known for working to the wee hours of the morning. His work schedule was quite arduous.
I will tell you this much: how his health held up through the war, I have no idea. But he drove General Wavell in North Africa to distraction. It must have just drove him nuts because he wanted to know where all the supply dumps were going to be, what his plan for advancement and fighting against Rommel were going to be, and just every other day he was getting a note demanding, what's the latest? And I'm thinking, if I'm Wavell, I'm going, oh my God, leave me alone, let me do my job. So that's why I say he was a micromanager.
Well, unfortunately, his North African commanders didn't measure up as far as he was concerned. But it wasn't just him. I mean, Wavell was one. I can't remember now who the other was. Auchinleck, was the other.
Osterlich or something like that.
Auchinleck, and both of them ended up having to be replaced. But
that's when Montgomery showed up.
And actually, here's an interesting story about Montgomery. This could be like the World War II.
I was going to say, right? We really do have other topics to talk about.
We do. But this is interesting stuff too.
Sure it is.
Montgomery actually was not meant to take over the Eighth Army.
That's not what Monty thought.
No, well, no, it was the commander, the replacement commander. I believe Wavell. It was Wavell who was replaced and being replaced. And by the way, that was not just Churchill's decision. That was Brooks' decision as well, who was the chief of staff. He agreed with that, and so now I want to say Gort, but not Gort, the Lord Gort from fighting in France during 1940.
Right.
So I have to. It was Gort. I'd have to check that. But anyway, there was a completely different general who was actually assigned to take over the Eighth Army. And as he was when he was flying,
he was killed in an airplane crash.
That's it exactly. He was. I don't recall
if he was on the way to take over.
Exactly. So it was actually quite accidental that Montgomery took over the army, because he was not slated to take over the army, and in fact, Montgomery was not a very liked general either.
Oh no!
So,
but you know something,
amongst his colleagues, I should say, his troops loved him. I understand, but his colleagues, his equals, so to speak.
Well, he was an arrogant, pompous ass. Let's be honest about it. And he wanted control of all the when D-Day came. He wanted to be in control of the armies in Europe instead of the Americans, and just he couldn't get along with was it? Oh, come on, Patton. That's it. George Patton. He could not. They hated each other. So anyway,
lots of people couldn't get along with George Patton.
Well, Private Leo Major, a very famous Canadian soldier, refused to take the Distinguished Service Cross from him, or Distinguished Service Medal in his case, because he thought Monty was incompetent, and he refused the first one. Took another one later from another general, but no way was he taking that from Monty. He had no respect for the man. But to give Montgomery his due, he was at his best in North Africa. He took on Rommel. Now, there were a lot of side things that came into this. The fact that couldn't take Malta, and that Rommel's having supply problems and fuel problems and all that sort of thing. But overall, if Monty had lost at El Alamein and Rommel had gotten through the Suez Canal, it would have changed the whole course of the war. That's one of the most important battles of the war, is when Monty beat Rommel at El Alamein. And boy, I'll tell you, you got to give the guy credit for that. Whether you don't like anything else he did, that was his shining moment.
Yes.
Speaking of shining moments, we really should get back to what we're supposed to talk about.
What do you mean back to it? We haven't even started.
It's funny we're talking about the military, because there's been something, and maybe it's a nice segue, because in those days, armies were designed to do two things. They were designed to kill people and break things. In a nutshell, that's what a military is all about. That's its primary purpose. The fact it does other things is all ancillary. It's all, aid to civil power. Like if you have an earthquake or a fire, the military comes in and helps out. That's nice. I'm glad they do that, and they're very good at it. But that's not their primary role. That's why they carry weapons. That's why they learn to use them. That's why they go on training exercises where they take on the enemy and try to figure out the best way to kill each other. That's what it's all about. So when I heard about the new dress code coming out for the Canadian military, I was mortified. I haven't been this angry about something since Anthony Carrillo got killed. And if the listeners don't know who he is, just Google Anthony Cirillo and the Canadian War Memorial, and you'll figure it out fast enough. But the point I'm making is that what they've done is they've turned the military into a social experiment. Now, just to hit a few highlights, there's a lot more to it than this, but members are now allowed to have hair of any length or color, as long as it doesn't cover their face. They can have nail polish, including the guys. They can wear whatever gender clothing they want to. They'll be issued purses. What kind of... Can you imagine if we'd have done this on D-Day in 1944, we'd have won the war in a week, because the Germans all would have died laughing at us. Who takes... can you imagine? Look, they want to make the military more inclusive. I couldn't care less about inclusivity. The only part that needs to be inclusive is, are they all Canadians? Are they all people willing to wear the Queen's uniform in defense of this country? That's the only part of it I care about. I don't care what they look like. I don't care, what they believe in, as long as they believe in the flag and our democracy and our society and are willing to lay down their lives to defend it. That's as far as it goes. After that, you have to have standards. Without standards, you haven't got anything. So they keep playing this, well, how do we recruit more people? Which is the thrust of this whole thing. Well, tell you what, let's let them bring that garbage, this social garbage, into the military, and we'll let them wear their hair as long as they want. Did you ever go, when you were in the service, did you ever go to Holland in the 1980s?
Not just Holland, if you're talking about hair length.
Yeah, well, we went to Holland. We were alongside their flagship called De Ruyter, which has a whole history unto itself. But I never forget taking a tour of that ship, and the guy at the bottom of the ladder when we were coming on board had hair down to the middle of his back. And we just looked at him going, what? They had a union. Can you imagine calling a strike in the middle of a war? Now, they wouldn't do that, but that's not the point.
Well,
no, this is not how you run a military.
They had collective bargaining agreements, which
you know what?
Prohibited them
going
from
ashore on
being
D-Day until we get
the hours of the day. Yeah,
I mean, it's nuts.
Well, let me just say, Nick, that first of all, I have to make the observation that, contrary to your assertion, it sounds to me like you do care what they look like.
Yes, I do, and I don't like what I'm seeing.
I guess what I would say is that while from our experience, from my experience, my background, I'm not comfortable with these changes, but ultimately, I'm perfectly prepared to set aside my level of discomfort. This is not what bothers me. What bothers me about these changes is that they seem to be predicated on the belief that people are not joining the military because they have to have short hair, or they're not allowed to color their hair green or pink, or green and pink. Okay, and in the end, what color you color your hair isn't going to make a difference to your fighting capacity. But it does bother me that they think that a person who's going to say, I'm not going to join the army because I want to keep my hair color orange and they won't let me. It sounds to me, I could be wrong, but it sounds to me like this is somebody that maybe doesn't have quite the right mindset and quite the level of dedication.
Well, see, this is where I was going next.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm going to put a pause on this conversation. We've got a caller we want to take before the bottom of the hour. He's been on hold for a few minutes. So let's get to our friend Robert out in Montreal. Hey, Robert.
Hello, guys. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Or me?
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay. How can I get on video? How can I get on video with you guys?
Well, that's a great question. Robert, the question is, do you want...
We'll do it next time. We'll do it next time.
Do you really want to be on video with us, though, Robert? You see, right now, Robert, right now, when you call, you're more or less anonymous, okay? But the minute you're on video, people are going to see your face, and, especially because this stuff goes up on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
That's it. You will be...
I'm dead for life.
That's
well,
right.
you will be easily identified.
That's right.
Us.
You got to ask yourself how badly you want to do that. So what's on your mind tonight?
Well, first of all, did you get the email about what alt-right and alt-left means?
Yeah, I did. I knew what alt-right and alt-left means. It was a rhetorical question.
Well, you didn't seem to know on the last show. I said, what does alt mean? What does
Well, the point I was making was, when you say alt-right, alt-left, what exactly do they mean by that? Because I don't think the people who use it know what it means.
Well,
just throw it
alternative
around
right.
like
I got no clue. You know, alternate right, alternate
yeah, I
left.
know.
I don't know what it means.
No, I guess that's my point. Nobody knows what it means, but they throw it around like a some kind of evil name tag that they want to stick on people they don't like. So it's like,
Well, like I said, the alt-right right now is neo-Nazis and KKK, and alt-left is Black Lives Matters and Antifa.
those groups are not on the right; they're on the left.
Which one?
Even that's not accurate.
You mean the Nazis?
Yes, the Nazis are
that's
left.
True. Hitler was on the left. He was a socialist, communist, or socialist, whatever.
Yeah, there's like it's kissing cousins between socialism and communism.
So you were talking about uniforms.
Fascism.
Did you see the one the picture I sent you on Facebook?
Say that again. I missed it.
Huh?
I missed what you said.
I said I just sent a picture of our new uniform.
I saw that.
Facebook
yes,
message.
I saw that.
Well, you were talking about uniform. There's a new color.
Well, that'll be what we're used to.
I was in the Air Force in the 80s, which was better than you guys. You were both people. So
easy.
And
if it flies, it dies.
But I went to Norway, deployment in Norway back in the 80s, and the Norwegian Air Force had a union, and they wanted long hair in the service, and that's what they had limited powers, but they wanted long hair. And the union let them have long hair in the military.
I can't get my head around that. I'm going to let Joseph in on this because it just blows my mind.
This is actually the way it is everywhere. It's the idea of short hair in the military, crew cuts and stuff like that. That's not actually the norm. In probably most countries, they don't have strict hair regulations.
One of the biggest armies in the world does.
Okay.
Which one? United States?
The Americans.
Okay.
And I doubt the Chinese have long hair.
Yeah, the big question is, for instance, in Israel, where you guys generally don't have long hair anyway. That's kind of a hippie thing, and people are not generally guys don't run around with really long hair anymore. And I know I'm overgeneralizing, but the real question is, what do you do about the beards?
Well, that's also been thrown out. They can now have beards as long as they want, as long as they're trimmed neatly. So if you have a beard,
that's one question. That's one question I always wanted to ask you guys. Beard in the Navy in the 80s.
Yes.
Right. Even if it was short, how did you do it with gas mask?
Well, that was the whole trick. If you had a beard in the Navy, you had to get a good seal with your gas mask with your beard. If you couldn't, you had to shave your beard off.
Oh, so there was a little hickey.
Right.
Okay.
Some guys did. Some guys pulled it up, but they kept the under the chin shaved short.
Now here's
well, there must have been a lot of people in the Navy because I saw a lot with beards.
Yeah. Well, we weren't worried about those gas attacks too much in the Navy anyway. Okay, so it was different.
Yeah, we had that citadel to keep us safe.
But let me just make this one observation while we're talking about haircuts and beards and the military. Okay, in the French Foreign Legion, the sapper units. Okay, their rules are they have two rules. They have to have very close cropped hair on their head, and they're not allowed to shave their beards.
Yeah, well,
not allowed. You mean any length?
Not allowed, and some of these guys have very long, bushy beards.
Well,
so just like the Indians in India.
Well, you see, you didn't see, Robert. Your thing is you didn't see any pictures of me 2 months ago or 3 months ago before I
but you're not in the Navy anymore.
I'm not in the Air Force anymore either.
No, even today, I should have shaved today. It gets to about 3/4 of an inch long. I can't stand it. I don't like long hair.
Hey, Nick, I don't shave. I shave once a week now. I'm working from home and I don't go out that much. I got trouble with my right leg. I need a new hip. I got a pinched nerve. I'm in pain all the time, so I'm not going anywhere.
Robert, I can fix that with a chainsaw. Just hold still.
Or
yeah, I
alternatively,
knew you were going to come up with that.
Alternatively, Robert, I think you might qualify to join the Canadian Armed Forces now again.
That's right.
Okay.
Probably.
All right,
you could rejoin, and then maybe you'll get a hip replacement through them for, well, I was going to say for free, but I guess.
All right.
There's one reason why I wanted to call you. You can talk about it after you take your break.
Okay, yeah, because we do have to take a break.
Your opinion? Right. Yeah, can you take your opinion on January 6th in Washington, D.C.? Because this is getting a circus. It's becoming a circus.
Yep. We'll be glad to do that.
If you can talk about it.
I'm not done with the Canadian military, but we'll take a minute and talk about that because I want to talk about what the Liberals...
Yeah, the January 6th. I need your opinion on that because it's a bloody circus.
Well, that's pretty much the opinion. It's a joke. Anyway.
But if you can give me your opinion on the show, I would really appreciate it. I'll be listening to it. By the way, Joseph, yes, I have to go to YouTube to get my podcast now. Because you don't update the website.
Well,
so guilty as charged.
All right.
No,
because you guys, I gotta bring this.
I have to extract the audio. From YouTube. Then I have to modify the audio. It takes forever.
Well, what else would you do? You got nothing else to do.
Guys, we have to take a break. We're way over time here.
We'll be
good night, guys.
Call, Robert. We're going to take a little biological break here. You can find that any way you want to, and we'll be back in about 60 seconds or so. Stay right there. We'll be right back with more right after this on the Nick and Joe Show.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a made-in-Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
All right, here we are back again. Thanks for staying. Well, we've got a busy chat room tonight. I've been watching the comments, haven't had a chance to make any comments on the comments, but we certainly are watching and paying attention to what you're saying. And as always, it's a lively debate in there. So thank you all for joining us tonight in the chat room. It's it's like its own little counterculture where not counterculture, but subculture where they get together, they meet here at the show, and then they go off on their own tangents and talk about whatever they want to talk about, which is fine. We don't have any problem with that at all. Now, Robert wanted us to comment on January 6th. January 6th committee hearings. and the kind of situation going on. He's referring to, of course, the United States. January 6th, well, the left will call it an insurrection, and they're doing everything they can to destroy the Republican Party because they're terrified. I've been watching not a lot of the proceedings, but keeping an eye on it, just because it really is a circus. They've had, I don't know, Joseph, have you been watching any of this?
Not in the least.
Okay, well, there was one woman.
That doesn't mean I don't have an opinion.
Yeah.
But,
well, let me relate this one story. This woman showed up, testified before this testimony that said she was with Trump in the Suburban he was driving around in on January 6th. And she made the allegation that he leapt forward, tried to grab the steering wheel, and he wanted to go downtown. He said, "They won't hurt me." They told him there were weapons. He said, "They're my people. They're not going to hurt me." And he wanted to go downtown. And he tried to take control of the Suburban. And there was no corroborating evidence. And she came out. She testified in front of the committee and then vanished, because what happened was the Secret Service agents who were involved came out and said none of that happened. And when they diagnosed and dissected the situation, it would have been impossible for Donald Trump, a man in his 70s, to leap forward 3 sets of seats to get at the guy behind the steering wheel without the other guys stopping him, because there was about 4 or 5 people in that SUV. So it was all nonsense. But this is the lengths this particular circus is trying to go to ostensibly destroy the Republican Party, because they know what's coming in November. And they're doing everything they can to say, hey, look over here. Don't look at Biden's performance. Don't look at what our chances are. Look over here. And it's not working.
Well, call me pedantic, but my problem with the January 6th hearings in the United States is, quite frankly, that I don't consider what happened to be an insurrection. I think that you have to really squeeze that that round peg into a square hole, or square peg into a round hole, to make that work. It was a riot. I think that what I see in the United States, and to a certain degree I see here as well, is this ongoing polarization, and I think that both sides bear a little bit of guilt or of blame for it. There's just so much stuff being circulated around there, and we were talking the other day offline, Nick, about the fact that there are people out there that, in this past week in particular, were accusing me of being, a closet liberal or secret liberal, and I'm thinking, okay, well, these guys don't even know what it means to be a liberal or to be a conservative, and from a really principled point of view. I don't want to get into that right now. I'm just saying that I don't. I've been listening. I think that the left, if I could use that term loosely, for instance, I think they're absolutely insane about January 6th. I look at the rhetoric and arguments that have been, and the demonstrations and the insanity, virtual insanity around the Supreme Court decision in the United States to overturn Roe versus Wade.
Right.
Okay. But then I listen to ostensibly conservative talk radio in the States from time to time, and I hear some of these hosts going on about how, the Democrats, they hate children, they want to kill children. I'm going, that's, first of all, I don't think that's true, and it's just that kind of rhetoric is not helpful. So and I'm saying this coming from a pro-life perspective, as you very well know, Nick. So, at some point in time, the adults have to get control over the situation again. And maybe they can't. I don't know. Bottom line is this: the whole January 6th thing is a gong show. Now,
Absolutely.
having said that, Nick, what's the most troubling thing about this whole January 6th thing is about how much attention we Canadians are paying to this. And there's something that happened last week that is quite appalling. That should never have happened in Canada, and I'm shocked that it's not getting the attention that I think it deserves. And that is that Tamara Leach, who was one of the organizers of the demonstration, the truckers' demonstration in Ottawa in February, has been rearrested. She lives in Medicine Hat. They arrested her in Medicine Hat, transported her all the way back to Ottawa, and she had a bail hearing and she was denied bail. And the argument being that she breached the original conditions of her original bail. But this is a mother, a grandmother. She's not violent. I had the opportunity to meet with her several times during the demonstration or the protests. She's a sweet woman. There isn't an ounce of violence in her that I could detect, and she's been railroaded. But then the idea that they're going to put her in jail now and hold her over until she has a trial over what? Okay, it's I don't want to make this about whether or not the truckers were justified in having their demonstration. Separate issue altogether, okay? I have my views on that, but I don't want to get into that. I'm saying that it is a gross perversion of justice for this woman to be held without bail under these conditions. But people in this country are just sort of going, well, they don't know. And people who identify themselves as conservatives in this country are more concerned about what's going on down in the States in these January 6th hearings and not paying attention to what's going on here. We had committee hearings here on the invoking the Emergencies Act, and there were bombshell revelations that hardly got mentioned in the press, let alone that people really cared about them. It's almost heartbreaking to be involved in the process and have so little attention or caring about some of the things that are going on in this country.
There are people I've run into, mostly on social media, who think that Tamara Leach is some kind of criminal and should be in jail because she was engaged in illegal activity and stiffed a friend for $20,000 in bail. None of that's true. I don't know about the $20,000 part. The prosecutor in the case is a huge liberal donor. He gave over $17,000 to the Liberal Party of Canada and was appointed to be the prosecutor for the Crown.
I want to be careful. I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt you, Nick. I want to be careful on what we're saying about that because I don't know the facts around this guy's contributions to the Liberal Party. I have heard exactly what you said, and now I'm going to get flooded with emails to my personal email from all the people out there that are going to listen to this, and they go, "You see, Ben-Ami's defending those Liberals again." Okay, but this is the problem, right? I am not aware of any circumstances that a person can donate $17,000 to the Liberal Party or to any party. Okay, now that's a very serious allegation. That's a criminal. That's a crime. What people are saying.
Absolutely, it is. Now, the point I want to make with that, the reason why I mentioned that number is because I got that from the mainstream press. That's out there in the mainstream media. I didn't make that number up.
No, well, but I said this is the thing that I worry about is I'm skeptical about that number because to me it just sounds it sounds fictitious to me. And you know my opinion of the mainstream media these days and how lazy journalists are in that. But I just don't know how you can donate that kind of money to any political party as
Well,
an
they didn't give a
individual.
time period for one thing, so it could have been
Well,
stretched out over a number of years. But
okay, that is
you
a
know what?
possibility. Fair enough.
It also doesn't really matter whether it was $1,280, whether it was $100. Well, look, anybody can do whatever they want to with their donations as long as they're legal. But couldn't you have found someone who had no ties to the Liberal Party to be a Crown prosecutor in this case? It just smacks of this is about politics. It's not about justice.
Well,
And
it is about politics, irrespective of who the prosecutor is. This whole
well,
thing
I
has
know that,
become
but I mean,
totally
in
politicized.
order to be well, okay, one thing that the Liberals don't care about is optics. Otherwise, half the stuff they do, they wouldn't do. And the optics on this do not look good. And it's just another sign of the kind of arrogance we see coming down from Parliament Hill. Now, Tamara Leach, to me, is a Canadian patriot. She took a chance. She stood her ground in a very look. I watched the video of her being arrested. She did not resist in any way. She cooperated with the police. She, whatever they asked her to do, she did. There was nothing about anything surrounding that arrest was violent. Nothing about the protest itself was violent. There were a few bad apples, but when you have that many people, you're always going to have some wingnut or dingbat or agents I can never say it. People out there
Provocateur.
provoking situations, agents provocateur. My French is terrible. You know what I'm trying to say. But the point is, you always have somebody trying to stir the pot and make this into something it's not. And so overall, this was a very peaceful protest. And the only real violence was by the police when they trampled that woman with their police horse. That's the only act of real violence I saw. And she's in jail? What? I mean, come on.
Even then, I mean, what are the charges here?
I'd have to look
nuisance?
it up. There was
Public nuisance?
She was inciting, what was it? Not inciting violence, but inciting, I don't want to say insurrection. I don't think it was it either. She was counseling something. I'd have to look the story up again.
See,
I should have.
to me, it just doesn't rise.
No, it doesn't.
To the level of the kind of actions that have been taken by the authorities here, and it's extremely troubling in two respects. Again, A, that it could happen here in Canada, and B, that nobody seems to care. And by the way, I have to tell you that if I was a card-carrying, dyed-in-the-red, raving liberal, I'd still have the same opinion here. This isn't a left-wing, right-wing, conservative versus liberal issue. Okay, this is a very serious problem with respect to the administration of justice, and you could think that what the truckers were doing was totally inappropriate, and that the emergency act, invoking the Emergencies Act, was completely appropriate. But this is a miscarriage of justice, and it shouldn't be politicized. And whether you're left wing, right wing, conservative, socialist, communist, NDP, liberal, conservative, I don't care. This is an issue completely independent of your political persuasion. It should be, and people in this country should be very disturbed. As I said, that it's happening, but I'm particularly disturbed by the fact that nobody seems to care.
Yeah, well, you're right. And you know what? Although, having said that, that has been the hallmark of Canadians' attention to their own affairs for a long time now. People know more about American politics than they do their own. And it's why governments like this one get away with the kind of stuff that they do, because we're too focused on what's going on. January 6th committee hearings is an example. What's going on with Joe Biden, and Hunter Biden, and that whole dog's breakfast down there, the southern border down there. People are transfixed by that stuff, and they watch hours of it, but they won't watch CPAC for a half an hour to get an idea what's going on in their own country. Because you're right, there were a lot of bombshells dropped in that Senate hearing about the emergency, I want to call it the War Measures Act, the Emergencies Act, and how it was not asked for by the police. There's other revelations and other situations going on about the shooting in Nova Scotia, where the head of the RCMP is now admitting she had pressure put on her by Justin Trudeau to turn over that information. And I won't go over all that again, but the point is that there's some real serious crap going on here in Canada. And you're right. Everybody's so focused with what the Americans are doing, they're not paying attention to the fact their own house is on fire.
Right. Do I care about Roe versus Wade when we're putting grandmothers in jail without bail for what it will be by the time she actually sees the inside of a courtroom for a trial is going to be well over a year. I mean, it's devastating for her and for her family, and for what? It's just so plain wrong, Nick. And I can't just on your comment about Canadians paying more attention to what's going on in the States. Am I the only person that has noticed that the more the government imposes regulations and doles out cash to Canadian broadcasters to cover Canadian stories, to give Canadian broadcast professionals a leg up, the more the government intervenes to protect Canadian identity, the less Canadians pay attention to it.
Yeah.
It's paradoxical almost.
It's also incredibly frustrating because, look, like I said, when your own house is on fire, who cares what's going on in your neighbor's backyard? You've got your own problems to deal with. One of the things that makes Canada such a great nation is the fact that in other jurisdictions where this is going on, they have stormed the government palaces. Is it in Bangladesh or Malaysia or someplace like that? The people actually drove the prime minister or the head of their country, I don't know, prime minister or president, whatever they call him, their grand poobah, out of his home and are dive swimming in his pool.
You see, now that's an insurrection.
Yeah, yes. There's another place, and again, I think it was in Romania, where the people are storming through the streets looking for politicians and running right through the police, going after the politicians who have caused all this disaster.
Of course, we're not advocating anything like that.
No, I'm saying, but what I'm saying is we don't do that.
We don't.
That's what makes Canada such a great nation. We don't do that. That's not how we handle things. But it's frustrating to get people to deal with things properly at the ballot box. That's where go to Queen's Park or Parliament Hill or whatever legislative governmental body you want to go to and protest there. That's what it's for. Despite what Trudeau will tell you, that's what Parliament Hill is for. That's why I don't have any problem with the protest that went on last January. That's what it's for. If the local citizenry gets upset, well, too bad. You live in the nation's capital. You should expect this kind of stuff, especially given the circumstances under which this protest took place. So I'm ranting, but just holy smokes, man, it's frustrating. But at the same time, there's you and me, and there are, I will admit this, there are a number now of Canadian podcasts who are dealing with issues just like you and I are from the same vantage point. I can think of 2 or 3 right off the top of my head who are doing the same kind of job we are. So it's nice not to be alone, that there are more and more voices joining us, because I think you and I were one of the first in Canada to concentrate primarily on Canada. We talked about a lot of different things, but as far as, there's as having podcasts that deal with it, everybody else is Johnny come lately. Glad to have him join us, don't get me wrong. But you and I have been going over this now for a number of years, and these guys, glad to have them, but they're and I certainly encourage them to keep doing what they're doing. We need all the help we can get. But you and I have been at this for a while now.
Yes, we have.
And I don't see us stopping anytime soon, except for the next break, which is not quite yet.
Yeah. Well, we're going to see what's going to happen, Nick. It's yeah, we certainly live in interesting times, as the allegedly Chinese proverb goes.
May you live in interesting times.
Yeah, well, we live in interesting times, and of course, the truth is that we've always, every time is an interesting time. So as much as we decry the challenges that we're facing today, and I think they're significant, and in many ways they're unique. Every generation has its challenges. So Bank of Canada raised its lending rate
by a
full percentage today. That's a lot.
Well, that was what I was going to just kind of take the last few minutes to talk about. Think about the thousands of people who went out and spent, king's ransoms on homes, way overvalued homes. And as the market, I was talking to my realtor the other day, and he was saying that the feeding frenzy is over, and prices are now going to start to decline, and there'll be a correction in the market, because nothing like that ever lasts forever.
Right.
And what are people going to do who paid, $750,000 for a $300,000 home once, right, and had to mortgage it? Once that interest rate goes up by 1 point, and it will.
Yeah, and the other thing that this is going to be a major problem for moving forward is our public debt. It's one thing to be borrowing money hand over fist when you're only paying, a quarter of a percentage point annually in interest. That's another thing when you're starting to talk 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%.
Well, wasn't it Freeland who said that we can get away with borrowing all this extra money because of low interest rates, and that the deficits could be justified because of money so cheap right now? Does that mean they're not justified now that money's starting to get more expensive?
Yeah, well, it's that is a real concern, and it's not just the borrowing; it's the refinancing and moving. It's a real problem, and I'm afraid that we're going to be in for a period of time here of a lot of economic turmoil and political turmoil around government services, government financings, etc.
I saw a poll today that said that 50% of Canadians feel like they're already in a personal recession, and that because, first of all, the government figures only cover a very small fraction of the things you actually have to pay for. Gasoline is at an all-time high. Energy in general is very expensive, which makes everything else very expensive.
Right.
Because without energy, you've got nothing. We're going to get into the next hour. We're going to talk about Justin Trudeau on a couple of different fronts, but one of the things he wants to do is ban or severely limit the use of nitrogen-based fertilizer. He has no idea the kind of damage that would do to our agricultural sector. It's because of nitrogen-based fertilizer we can feed ourselves, and he's going to take that away from farmers. We see what's going on in Holland about that, and how the Dutch farmers are reacting to the same policy trying to be imposed by the Dutch government, and it isn't going well. And it's around the world. Part of the problem over in Malaysia and Thailand and places like that is they want to try the same thing. And the rice farmers are seeing huge drops in crop yields, and they're the ones in the streets protesting.
Well, let's take a break and get into this in the next segment.
All right. You guys stick around. We'll be right back with more on the Nick and Joe Show. Go get your favorite beverage. Go do your biological break, whatever you have to do. We'll be back in a couple of minutes right after this on the Nick and Joe Show.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
All right, just making a minor technical adjustment here. My microphone fell over. Can't have that. All right, welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show, folks. We've got a busy chat room as always and some very good comments in there. We are paying attention, but we also are having quite a conversation ourselves. And feel free to join us if you'd like. With the phone number occasionally rolls across the screen. And we wanted to get into, we were talking about energy and all that, the rise in interest rates in the last segment. We talked about a few things, everything from the military and this and things like that to what's going on south of the border. But I want to, Joseph, bring your attention to, if you're not aware of it, about what's going on in Holland and what's coming to Canada. Now, in summation, the Dutch government has imposed a ban and a cap or a massive reduction on the use of nitrogen as nitrogen-based fertilizers. And it's because of fertilization that we can feed as many people as we do. And the Dutch are very industrious people. They are hardworking. Believe me, I know from personal experience. My dad was one of the hardest working men I've ever met. And he grew up on a small, and when I say small, I'm talking like a couple acres at the most, on a farm in Holland, until he was about 15. And then after the war, they immigrated to Canada, and he got into agriculture over here as well. And so that's how come I grew up on a farm. But I'm telling you, these people, not only do they have a farm to run, but each farmer has to manage his own section of the dike or polder. And they have to keep it in repair. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. And when Holland wants more farmland, they have to put in a great big earthen work and then pump it out. And it takes about 7 years to desalt the earth. So that's why Holland is so small, because it's on an estuary and most of it's under the sea level. And so, in other words, these guys know something about agriculture. And when you see miles of tractors lined up on highways that should be in the fields and should be turning over the ground and should be harvesting crops in Holland, you know you've got a problem. And they have flatly, they've gone to protest. And the Dutch have a lot in common with Canadians. They are not the kind to take up arms. They are not the kind to be violent. Any images I've seen of the protest, just a bunch of tractors sitting in rather inconvenient places, and the farmers are getting their message out. Now the police have gone so far as to actually shoot at them with firearms, and one 16-year-old boy was driving a tractor. If it hadn't been for a metal bar that separated the right hand of the left hand side of his windshield, that's where the bullet struck, it would have hit him. So the police are more aggressive than the farmers are. Now, why do I bring this up? Because Justin Trudeau wants to do the same thing. Let me share with you and the listeners just a paragraph or two out of his story that comes from True North. Let's see. Okay, I'll start here. Strict nitrogen and ammonia emissions caps by the Dutch government have sparked nationwide protests. Tens of thousands of farmers and their supporters have formed convoys throughout the country demanding a referendum on government measures. As a result of the chaos, farmers have even been fired on by police. According to the president of the Western Canadian Wheat Growers, Gunter Jochum, Canadian farmers could also soon have their backs against the wall as a result of emissions targets. We have talked to other producer groups. We are very concerned about exactly the same scenario, and we will go to these lengths like what's happening in the and will we go to these lengths like what's happening in the Netherlands? I don't know. But all I can say is if you push farmers back right up against the wall where their livelihood is at stake and it's a direct result of government overreach and not science-based policies, then who knows what could happen. You know something, Joseph, I want to make a point here because Trudeau, let me finish this next paragraph just to give people an idea what Trudeau wants to do. 2 years ago, the Liberal government introduced a 30% emissions reduction target for fertilizer use in the agricultural industry. In comparison, the Netherlands has introduced a 50% emissions cut. The fertilizer target's objective to contribute to lower GHG emissions, so it's all about global warming, folks, from the agricultural sector, building on and leveraging public and private programs and initiatives. So they want to cut it by 30%. One thing I do know about farmers, if you think truckers are independent and don't like to be told what to do because they are out there doing what they know how to do better than anybody else, Canadian farmers are just as independent, if not more so. These people really are grassroots. When you talk grassroots, man, these are who you're talking about. When you talk about the salt of the earth or, people who actually get their hands dirty, they really do. They have calluses. They work hard. Farming is a very, very risky and dangerous, risky, I mean, financially and physically, demanding, and sometimes completely out of your control business. It's the only business you can go into where you buy everything to run that business at retail and then turn around and sell the product, whatever you produce from that business at wholesale, and somebody expects you to make money at it. It's completely backwards. And yet, for generations, Canadian farmers have been some of the most productive farmers on the planet. And now they got to face this. This is insane. This is all about global warming. This is all, it's almost like they got done with the truckers and now they're going after the farmers. And I don't understand why.
Well, I don't actually even understand the alleged science behind this. I don't know what their complaint is about these fertilizers, but I'm going to assume that somebody has crunched some numbers somewhere. So I'm not going to criticize the science until I've had a chance to read up on it a little bit. But I will say this: it's very difficult for me to believe that a major source of greenhouse gases, again, assuming that you accept the argument about greenhouse gases inducing dangerous climate change. So I'm just not aware of this. This is a relatively new argument, and as with everything else, okay, nobody seems to be thinking about the long-term or even necessarily the short-term implications of the measures that are being imposed. and it's not for no reason why half of the planet is not starving. Um, our ability to feed people on this planet is entirely predicated on the advances in crop yield that has come from two sources. One is, frankly, genetically modified crops that have proven to be more resilient when faced with what I'll call climate extremes.
Yeah, drought and flood.
Right, nothing to do with climate change or anything like that, but droughts happen, cold weather happens, etc. So that's the first thing, and the second thing has been our ability to produce more crops, more food by just our simple agriculture practices, growing practices, and a significant, perhaps even decisive factor in that has been the advancements that have been made in fertilizer. Now, it's really, I think it's really interesting to note that nobody here is alleging that nitrogen-based fertilizers or ammonia-based fertilizers are causing an epidemic in cancer or any other illness. So, it's like we've been seized with this panic. Okay, so it's not even a climate change alarmism. It's climate change panic. And as you know, Nick, the worst thing you can do even if there's a real problem, okay, let's set aside the question of whether or not there's an emergency that we have to act urgently, okay? The worst thing you can do, assuming that that's the case, is to panic. Because I think my sense is that we're making a lot of really bad decisions right now that we're going to pay for in the not too distant future. And one thing we're for sure going to pay for if we're reducing our agricultural output as a consequence of banning certain fertilizers in response to climate change, is that we're going to be pushing food prices up. We're going to have shortages, and it's the funny. Here's the worst part about this, Nick, is you and I and probably most of our viewers and listeners live in Canada. And so, food prices are going to go up, energy prices go up, but we're blessed to live in a place where we can handle those changes, okay, those pressures. We may have to make adjustments to things. We may have to reorder our priorities, etc., but we're able to live. The irony of all of this is that the people that are going to suffer the most from this kind of short-sighted policy are the people who don't have ready access to large-scale crops. We are literally taking measures now that are going to kill people in order to help save them. I mean, just think about that. It's too nutty to even contemplate. But really, we're going to starve people, and people are going to die from famine. Okay, in order to save the planet.
Well, consider this, Joseph.
But not me and not Justin Trudeau.
Of course not. They'll always have access to any kind of food they want, but because they're not paying for it. But what matters, look, I know you said you hadn't had a chance to read up on the science, and to tell you the truth, I haven't either. But here's what I do know. 78% of our atmosphere is what? It's nitrogen.
Right.
So how is this going to impact the climate in a negative way? Banning what exists. It's the largest substance on Earth next, maybe water. Maybe there's more water than there is nitrogen, but I doubt it. I think there's more nitrogen on this planet than any other substance that I can think of.
Okay, so again, I don't know. I have to review the scientific arguments before I could comment in any way intelligently.
Just at
I
first
will
blush,
just
it doesn't make any sense.
Well, I'll just say this, Nick. There is a scenario where it could make sense, and that is you have to remember that we're not just necessarily talking about nitrogen, the element, but we could be talking about, and I emphasize the word could because I don't know, but we could be talking about nitrogen combined with other elements to form different compounds. And so it's not just a question of nitrogen, but it's a question of, I don't know, nitrous oxide. I don't know.
Nitrous oxide is laughing gas.
No, I understand, but I don't know what the allegation here is, and so I would want to look into it a little further, but irrespective of all of this, okay, again, if climate change is a real problem, okay, and if it's a problem that we have to deal with urgently, then we have to make sure that whatever steps we're taking are actually going to be compatible with saving lives. It doesn't make sense for us to take measures that ultimately are going to cost lives in order to save lives. I mean, that's the craziness of this.
I know it's what's that term where it's there's a term I'm thinking of and I can't bring it to mind, but it's almost like to save the patient you have to kill him. It's like saying, "Oh,
it's
look,
a paradox."
Yes, it's a paradox, exactly. So if you have a patient who's got a head wound, in order to stop the bleeding, you cut his head off to save him because he's bleeding. That's the kind of mentality we're talking about here. Like, look,
so
it's been a long time since I tilled the earth, but I grew up on a farm. And my dad and I would go out and put fertilizer on every year because we had to. The ground, if you don't, you burn the ground out. There's only so many nutrients in the ground. And over time, depending on the crop that you're growing, certain crops draw more of certain elements. Like corn is hard on the ground. You have to put back in a lot of minerals and so on, which all comes in the fertilizer. And soybeans they draw something else. Tomatoes draw something else. So even by rotating your crops to lessen the impact on your soil, you still have to supplement it. And that's what fertilizers are for. Right. Now, if you stop that, in a few years, it will, believe me, we'll see this long before a few years, where you're going to see declining health of plants, lower crop yields. Lower crop yields mean higher prices for what there is, and what there is won't go as far because there isn't as much of it. Look what happened when they brought in ethanol down in Mexico. They put ethanol, which is based on corn. They took corn that would normally go into the food market and is a big deal in Mexico because that's what they make a lot of their tortillas out of, which is a staple in their diet. And it tripled the price of corn for tortillas because now there's not as much. So when demand is tight, prices go up. So ethanol, the production of ethanol, has caused hardship and, I won't say death or famine, but certainly has made it far more expensive for people in the second world and even in the third world to feed themselves because the very staple crop they need is now too expensive for them.
Right. Yeah. And
that's why I've been opposed to ethanol for years.
I think it's worth also just to loop back to circle back to your talk about nutrients for crops, to put it into the most simple, easy to understand terms, okay, Nick? And that is that when you raise farm animals, when you raise any animal, you have to feed them.
That's right.
When you're producing crops, you have to feed the crops also.
That's true.
Okay? Vegetables don't grow without being fed. Nothing in life lives without being fed. So So when fertilizer is nothing more than providing food in a sufficient quantity to be able to for those crops to live and grow. And so it's it's like going back to Patrick Moore likes to talk about carbon dioxide being plant food. Well, guess what? So is fertilizer.
That's right.
So you're going to starve the plants and therefore have less produce. As I go again, just to follow the line of logic here, we're going to starve the crops, have less produce to be able to feed the world. And remember, Canada is a major exporter of food.
Yep,
especially
especially wheat.
Okay, so what are we going to do when we no longer have the kind of large yields that we've been able to rely on? It's not just us that have been relying on them. It's people who live in countries, in places in the world that can't grow crops and haven't been able to grow crops for centuries in some cases.
Right.
Not because of global warming, but just because that's the way the climate is and has been for eons in the regions where they live.
Like Mongolia, as an example. I'm just picking them out of the air. They're a very arid country. They are landlocked. They are, I think they're landlocked. Theirs
Mongolia is, yeah.
Theirs is an equestrian-based culture. They have some animals, but they don't have farms like you and I would recognize. And the other thing I want to point out when it comes to fertilizer, the very best fertilizer I know about is manure that has been allowed to rot for a couple of years. Now, the problem, and when you use it, like we had it in abundance on the farm because we had always had horses and different animals. And every year I'd clean out the barnyard, put it in a pile, and 2 years later, it was ready to be used as fertilizer. And we got beefsteak tomatoes that weighed like 2 pounds. We once had turnips or some root crop. The thing was like the size of a baseball, softball, almost a football. It was huge because the soil was so rich. The thing is that in order to get at that kind of stuff on a mass scale, you have to have thousands of animals producing the manure to make the fertilizer out of.
Right.
This is why nitrogen-based fertilizers, which are not manure-based, are so effective because you don't. Yeah, thank you, Mongolia. Absolutely. So I was quite right. Very arid. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. But the point I'm making is that we solved one problem. We had New York City had a huge problem in 1900. They had horse manure in the streets all over the place. And when we invented the car and got rid of the horses in the downtown core of the cities, the manure problem all went away, but now they had another problem, congestion and so on. So solving one problem produces another. But stepping away from a manure-based agricultural system instead of a fertilizer-based agricultural system was a huge leap forward in all kinds of things, such as crop yields, how long your fields last before they're tired and they have to be, you plant a cover crop. It's called green manure, and you plow it under and let it rot and revitalize the soil before all those kinds of things had to happen. It's why we went from 20 bushels of corn per acre in 1900 to well over 200 today. That's how we did it.
Right.
That and hybridization and that kind of thing. But it was these kind of advances that allowed us to be able to feed the kind of numbers of people that we could feed. Greenhouses, okay? These kinds of technological based advances all stemmed from the fact that we have a source of food for these plants that do not require hundreds of thousands of four-legged animals producing poop in order for us to turn that in 2 years later into enough fertilizer to cover the ground with and we can plow into the ground and make it fertile again.
Right.
I mean, it's not hard to figure out. And what bothers me about our government's approach on this is it's like Trudeau wouldn't know a mixed farm if he tripped over one. He wouldn't know the difference between a duck and a pig,
Well,
or
Nick,
why they take different things to grow,
Nick,
and what they taste like. Well, might know what they taste like, but he certainly wouldn't recognize one from the other. He wouldn't know which end of a scoop shovel to use or a pitchfork.
well, Nick,
Got no idea what agrarian life is like.
Okay, but again, it's too easy to point a finger at Trudeau and say, "Well, look, you don't know what you're talking about." Because there's a whole department of agricultural experts who are supposed to be advising the government on this stuff. Now, granted, they're getting some direction and pushback, I'm sure, from the politicians, which just goes to illustrate a point that I'm making lately to people I've been talking to, and that is, you need to elect officials that actually have some real life experience. And everybody always likes to say real life experience, meaning, well, I was in the private sector, so I understand. I understand what it's like to have to pay the bills. Okay, but it's you need that, but you need people who actually have worked on farms. You need people who have actually worked in industry. And what happens is you end up with this situation where lobbyists come, or university professors or whatever, and they lobby the government, okay, or activists, and they lobby the government, and the government gets, frankly, bamboozled by these people, because the people who are making the final decisions, the politicians, for the most part, don't have a basic understanding of the things that they're deciding on, and it's not just a question of having experience; it's just a question of basic education. For example, okay, and I know we're coming up to a break here, but for example, when I hear people say in Ottawa about talking about climate change and how terrible climate change is, I ask them a simple question. Do you know, have you ever heard of the Canadian Shield? And you'd be shocked, Nick, to know that nobody has ever heard of the Canadian Shield anymore. Okay? So I
One
go,
of the major
okay, well,
features of the country.
You could Google Canadian Shield. But here's the thing about the Canadian Shield. You know how the Canadian Shield was formed? It was formed by receding glaciers. If there was no such thing as climate change, we wouldn't be living here. Certainly, we wouldn't be living here in Ottawa, because we'd be somewhere around 2 miles back to the imperial system under ice. So glaciers have been receding for tens of thousands of years, and insofar as Ottawa is concerned, it's worked out pretty good for us. Thank you very much. And it's worked out pretty good for you guys up in Sioux Lookout as well, for that matter.
Yeah, it has.
The whole geological formation comes from receding glaciers, and so of course there's such a thing as climate change. The question is not, is there such a thing as climate change? The question is twofold. Number one, is there an emergency? Okay, number one. And number two, is the emergency being caused by human activity? And the jury really is still out on both of those things. And going back to what I said earlier on in the show, Nick, if it indeed there's an emergency, okay, and I'm a skeptic when it comes to that claim, but even if there was an emergency, the worst thing you can do is panic, okay?
Yeah.
Because now what we're doing is we're literally, or no, I shouldn't maybe say that, we're figuratively clutching at straws, and
Well, we
we're
will
taking
be if they
measures
ban
that are going
single-use.
to ultimately cost lives.
Well, we will be clutching at straws if they ban single-use plastics.
But not if they have a flexible neck.
That's right. Or we cut them in half. Then they're not single use. You could give one to somebody else. Anyway, All right. Lots of great comments. I wish we had time to comment on some of them in the comments section. We are, I know I'm reading them. I'm sure Joe's keeping an eye on them too. And John is bringing them up once in a while as well. So just keep making comments. We're watching. I think it's time to take that next biological break. So we'll be back in a minute or so with more on the Nick and Joe Show right after this.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
Didn't get my typing done in time.
Nick, you should read. You should read some of the comments.
I am.
No, but you should read them out loud.
Oh, okay. Well, let me go.
I mean, if you're coming across some really interesting ones, you should read them out loud for,
Well, let me just read the ones I can see at the moment. Kirk said a little while ago, he said 15% of the White House staff have jumped ship. Does Justin even realize? There, see that? Now I can read it. How many farmers, fishermen, and sealers and hunters in Atlantic Canada voted traditional Liberal for decades? Talk about biting the hand that feeds you. And Marin says the starving of people will cause another huge migration by design. And Woodenhead says food shortages will happen. Teach your kids how to pickle and can. I wish my garden was bigger. Nitrogen is as much pollution as CO2 is. He's quite right about that, by the way. Craig says burning fields restores nitrogen. Yeah, there's some downsides to it too, but generally it's a traditional way of trying to enrich the soil. The trouble is you lose a lot of organic matter when you do that. So it's not just burning fields. There's more to it than that. Craig also says in another comment, he says, Trudeau isn't listening to any of the farm experts. He's obsessed with direction from the World Economic Forum. And the last one, Kirk says, years ago, it was common to see blueberry hills, etc., being burned here so the crop would be better and bigger for the market. Pickers like I as I think he meant pickers like me as a youngster would spend days early in the morning, either by hand or picker, filling boxes and buckets to sell to buyers to earn enough buy books for school. Yeah, you know what? Having said that, I'm going to make a comment on that. I wish more people would actually get out and do that. And I don't mean just pick blueberries, but spend a summer working on a farm. It'll teach you two things: what hard work's really like, and where your food comes from, and you'll appreciate both a whole lot more. Because right now we have a generation of snowflakes who want everything handed to them on a platter. They want mommy and daddy's lifestyle right now. They're not willing to work. And one of the conversations my wife and I were having the other day was about why there's such a workplace shortage. And I think there's basically three reasons for that. Number one, we have a bunch of babies who are up to 30 years old living in mom and dad's basement, who just don't want to work. They're living in mom and dad's basement. They don't have the self-discipline to get up and get out the door and go find a job, because that's hard. It's a lot easier to stay down there and play video games and do whatever else they want to do online. So you've got that element. Then you have another element that says, why should I work? I can make as much money on YouTube. And there are a lot of these young entrepreneurs online who are making good money, in basically a new kind of economy. So that's a big chunk of the workforce that traditionally would go out and work. And the third reason, and it's just all three of these are important. The third one is we have now a situation where our birth rate is only about 1. I don't think it's even 1.5 live births per woman in this country. And contrary to popular opinion, only women can get pregnant. I know that's a revelation, but there you go. And when you factor those things together, you end up with a huge gap in jobs versus people who want them. It's when you don't have enough bodies. If I was 18 today, I could write my own ticket, do whatever I wanted to do, because everybody is looking for someone coming out of high school or college or university that is willing to be molded into, whatever they can, whether it's the military, whether it's the police, the firemen, the EMS crowd, whether it's people wanting to get into agriculture, people who are looking for help in tourism, you name the industry. Everybody is looking for that wave of youth that every year used to come out of high schools and colleges and universities to take up the jobs that were being left behind by those who retired. Well, now you have a problem where people of our age, Joseph, we have, we're at the end of our working lives. I consider myself pretty much semi-retired now, because I'm 60 years old, and I'm not going to find a job that pays any kind of money because people don't want to hire somebody like me. They don't know anything about my health status. They don't know anything about, they don't know me. They don't know my life experiences. And I'm using me as the royal me here. People are, they get to that certain point, and others look at them and say, well, he'd only be here a year or two anyway. And, what if something happens? And, if I had to let him go, what's going to happen? Can he bounce back from that? When you're 20, if you get fired, it's no big deal. Go down the road and find another job. When you're when you're on the other end of your working life, that's not so easy anymore. So all of these things kind of come together and have left us with this massive gap in available bodies to fill the ranks that need to be filled. And I think that's playing into a huge part in the economic troubles a lot of businesses are having right now.
Yeah, look, everything is changing. And every so often, I think that the economy changes drastically.
I think you're right.
And perhaps the cycle of change has accelerated somewhat with advances in technology, etc. But it's a very different world today than it was when we were young, younger, and every person as they age says the same thing. So, certainly my parents said it. Their parents, I'm sure, said it to them as well. And so it's there's nothing really new here, except that I think that the scope of change in our lifetime and the speed of change is probably new. It's the scope of change has been much greater. and the speed has been quite a bit faster than it has been in the past. I don't know what the future holds in this respect, and I don't know. I think it's a mistake for us to spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out what we can do about the economy. The economy is going to sort itself out, for better or for worse, irrespective of what we do. And you know, that's one of the things about free markets is that, as my wife has sometimes said, what do you think the right price is for this? And my answer is always the same thing. The right price for anything is exactly what people are willing to pay for it. There is no objective right price or wrong price. And so, you know, people's tastes changed, their habits changed, their expectations changed. And as a consequence of all of this, their work patterns have changed. So I think that we're seeing a lot of that. But there are certain economic realities as well that never change. And that is that at some point in time, you have to pay the bills, whether you're in the private sector or you're an individual or you're in the public sector. And I fear that we are heading into a period of time when it's going to be a big challenge for people to be able to pay some of their bills. You were mentioning earlier, Nick, with rising interest rates, a lot of those people out there that I had, dare I say, were maybe a little greedy, saw an opportunity to buy real estate, became very heavily leveraged in order to to be able to afford what they were purchasing, and in many cases purchasing, thinking, okay, if I hold on to this property for a year or 2 or 3 years, I'm going to make a big profit off of it. I'll just sell it. Well, that's not going to happen. I mean, it could happen, but you know, I think that there was a lot of that going on, and even for people that thought, well, you know, I'm going to buy now. I'm going to tough it out, but I want to buy now because I want to settle into this property, and maybe I'm going to raise a family here. But they're so heavily mortgaged that, you know, with interest rates going up, that's going to suppress the housing market, and it's going to end up with prices falling. That's just basic economics. So you're going to have in 2 or 3 or 4 years or thereabouts, you're going to have a lot of people who are going to be going to renew their mortgages and finding out that they can't get a mortgage based on the value of their property that is equal to what they owe. So, you know, if I buy a property today for $1 million, and in 5 years I owe $900,000 on it still, but the property's only worth $500,000 when I go to remortgage,
you're in trouble.
That's a problem, and that's just down the road. So all of this other stuff, okay, that we're talking about, this panicking over climate change and panicking over this and panicking over that. You know, my advice to people is let's slow down, let's catch our breath, and let's make sure that whatever measures we're taking, individually or collectively, private sector or public sector, let's make sure that we're doing the right thing, and let's always ask ourselves, what is going to be the result of this 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road? We have to start, and this is such a difficult thing for today's generation, okay? You have to start thinking about yourself. You have to start situating yourself in a timeline where there's a past and there's a future. And you cannot just simply live in the moment. You have to think about the future, and you have to think about the future in your own respect and in the respect of other people around you who maybe aren't even born yet. And it's a difficult thing to do, but that's the responsible thing to do. And it may not make things easier. Don't get me wrong. I mean, this isn't a silver bullet, but I can tell you, man, Things are not going to be easy over the next maybe 5 to 10 years, but they could be a whole heck of a lot worse than they otherwise would be if we keep on doing silly things out of panic.
Oh, look, from that perspective, I don't have any argument with anything you just said, because in a nutshell, panic will get you killed either physically or economically. Um, though that's a truism I think has stood the test of time. What I'm worried about is, take my own family as an example. I've got 8 kids. I've got one, two, three, one, two, three, four, three that have managed to purchase their own home. The other ones are either too young yet or simply can't afford it. And even though I'm hopeful that over the next 2 or 3 years, prices in housing correct themselves, because I'd like to see them all have their own place, their own space. I think I'm not going to say everybody deserves that, but if you can get it for yourself, that's a great. I think that's a great thing, and it's a worthy goal to strive for. And it makes me nervous when I see the country as indebted as it is. When I see, I would suggest perhaps maybe artificially held low interest rates for a decade at least, if
Sure.
not longer, now beginning to rise and putting the squeeze on people in ways that they weren't planning on. Now, nobody's got a crystal ball. Like, if you buy a house today and you get what you think is a pretty good deal on it, what's it worth in 3 or 4 or 5 years? We don't know, because we don't know what the market's going to do. It's a big concern. So you have to pay attention to that, and it's a roll of the dice. If you are a young couple starting out today and you buy a $300,000 home somewhere, and you have to go a long way away from the major centers to get a $300,000 home, over here in Sioux Lookout, an average 2 or 3 bedroom home is at least $350,000.
Really, that surprises me.
Yeah, believe me, it surprised me too. You have to get over the Manitoba border before those numbers come down enough to be a lot more realistic. But who from Toronto or Ottawa or any other major center is going to move to a suburb of Winnipeg or someplace in a small town in Manitoba or Alberta,
Well,
or the prairies, in other words, to take up residence there?
well, you see, Nick, this is the fact is that people have to be able to move for work and just for economic reasons. And again, what worries me is that and I'm not saying that this is your position, but I am saying that that kind of talk is precisely what we used to do. And I'm thinking of the old coal mines in Cape Breton Island,
Mm-hmm.
where we would sink billions over a period of time in keeping those coal mines open when they were no longer economically viable, because we didn't want to make people have to move in order to find work, because that was bad for the communities. Okay, but at some point in time, you run out of other people's money to keep those communities going. Okay, and so the reality is nobody should look to the government to subsidize industry or economic activity in any geographical location simply because they want to keep that community alive. You have to move, and it's going to sound, what I'm going to say now is going to sound a little unsympathetic, but here we go, right? My father came to this country in 1952, literally with the clothes he had on his back and a little bit of money in his pocket, and he did it because he felt that this was where he wanted to settle down and make a family and raise a family, and ultimately that's what he did. But if my father could do it, in 1952, from thousands of miles away, a different continent, surely to goodness, people can be encouraged to move to smaller towns in order to be able to make ends meet. And we're living on the cusp, I think, of really significant economic change in respect of technology, where we're really starting to see, if there's a silver lining to the whole COVID fiasco, it's been that we're starting now to see that, there's a lot of work that can be done without having to have bricks and mortar offices.
Well, you're right
So,
on that, but let me jump in on that. You're quite right that there are my son, my oldest boy, he works from home. He's a software designer. He writes for Corel, and I'll spare the story how all that took place. But he works from home. My son-in-law, who married my second oldest daughter, they live in Cobden, and he works for Agriculture Canada, but he works from home.
right,
There's all kinds of jobs that can be done from home.
right,
The trouble is there are certain jobs that cannot be, and those are the nuts and bolts jobs. Those
right.
are the people who run the backhoes. Those are the people who dig the ditches, put in the foundations, lay the lay the infrastructure in place for our society to exist, to build the bridges and lay the railroad tracks and all these things. These are jobs that cannot be automated. They cannot be.
Right.
You have to be out in the weather, getting calluses,
Right.
getting hot and dirty and sweaty,
But you're
or
missing.
you know,
But you're missing.
those things cannot be done.
But you're
And
missing. Go ahead.
no, I don't. Well, let me finish because I don't think I am missing your point, but maybe I am. But the point I'm making is that while you're right about a lot of people can now live pretty much any way they want to, I'm a prime example of that. I can do my show from anywhere, you know. Now we're living in a specific geographic location because my wife works for an airline, but at the same time, even her job, if they wanted to, she could do. Well, take that back. Maybe she couldn't because a lot of paperwork involved, and that has to be done manually. But there are a lot of jobs within that industry that could be done from home. So I hear you on that. But what I'm saying is that in order for people to be able to live at home, there are jobs going wanting that make working at home possible. People who lay fiber optics cables, people who put up cell towers, people who, pave highways, uh, all kinds of these blue collar jobs are out there and crying for people to fill them, and
Right.
nobody wants to take them. A lot of people think it's just not worth the effort. They don't think the financial return is high enough to justify them getting off the couch and getting out the door and getting a job.
Well, let me just say that if that's people's problem, that they're dead wrong. Okay. The fact is that if you're looking for a career, okay, where you're going to make decent money, and you're always going to have work, then get into the trades. It's not easy.
I couldn't agree with
Okay,
you more.
but there's a future there. But the point I was making, Nick, was in terms of affordability, in terms of where you live, and for guys out there doing blue collar work, okay, you don't have to live downtown Toronto in order to do blue collar work in Toronto. You don't have to live in Manhattan to do blue collar work in Manhattan. So the point I'm making here is A, move to where the jobs are, but B, don't be afraid to move out of town and commute if you have to. Find a place where you can afford to live. And look, easy for me to say, right?
Yeah, look, I hear you, but right in your answer, you also identify another problem, and that is you want to commute to work. Okay, you've got basically two choices: public or private transit. Both are energy heavy. And what is
Right,
one of
of
the most
course.
expensive commodities you spend money on right now? So
Right.
how far away from the downtown core can you live before you say I can't afford it at $10 a gallon?
Yeah, no, you're not wrong about that, Nick. That is a new and evolving situation, and quite frankly, related to that is the fact that we have governments now that are actively discouraging you from commuting back and forth for work. So it's a real problem, and you know, I don't know what the answers are. Okay, all I can tell you with absolute certainty is my advice, Nick, to everybody out there is chill out, don't panic. Yeah, there are problems, but we're gonna find solutions to the problems, and you're gonna find solutions to your problems. Okay, it's not necessarily a collective thing where the government's going to intervene and say we're going to fix this for you. Just take it easy. And somebody who was far wiser than me once pointed out that sometimes, Nick, the best way to speed things up is to slow them down.
It sounds like the motto of the government.
Just think about all the times where you got yourself into a panic and you did, oh, we got to do this and we got to do it, and before you know it, you're halfway down the road, and the proverbial road, and now you're having second thoughts and you're realizing, shouldn't have come down this road.
Yeah, there's a cliff at the end of this road.
Yeah,
there's an old saying I really like. It says, "The hurrier I go, the behinder I get."
Yeah, well, that's kind of related to what I'm saying, and
I think there's some wisdom in that.
Yeah, just chill out, okay. I don't mean that in a climate sense. Just relax, okay.
Winter's coming soon enough. We'll chill out, believe me.
We're going to find solutions to the problems. And life is going to go on. And, all of this talk about phasing out fossil fuel cars and stuff like that, eventually that's going to happen too, probably. We don't need the government to be in there pushing. I think when I think about how the horse and buggy went, we didn't have to have a government program to stop people from having horses and buggies, okay? It just, people are going to come along. They're going to invent things that are going to solve our problems, and that's just the nature of the cycle of life, if you will. Sunrise, sunset, right?
Yes, that's it.
That's as far as I'm not going to bore anybody with my torture anyone with my
Fiddler on the Roof.
Hey,
that's from Fiddler on the Roof. We did that when
Fiddler on the Roof.
That's right. That was what was that character's name?
Tevye.
Tevye, yes. The whole town did that song. He did If I Were a Rich Man. He
did If I Were a Rich Man. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great, great play. It's a tragic ending, but a great play.
A very good movie.
Yeah.
And I was in Manhattan, speaking about Manhattan, I was in Manhattan with a colleague of mine a few years ago at a conference, and he wanted to take in a Broadway play. So I said, well, choose a play. Let's so he got us tickets to go to see Fiddler on the Roof, the stage version.
Right.
In Yiddish.
Oh, so that must have been fun.
Yeah, I said to him, I don't know, I don't speak Yiddish.
You don't?
I don't speak Yiddish, no. A few words here and there. English,
you
French,
speak Hebrew, though, right?
Hebrew, yes.
So what's the difference between Hebrew and Yiddish?
Huge difference. Huge difference.
All right.
Yiddish
it's not like Cape Breton. It's not like the difference between a Cape Breton accent and a Newfie accent, is it?
Oh, no. It's a different language altogether.
Oh, all right. Okay. Guess what? That is 2 hours, my friend.
We hardly even touched on our topics.
Yeah, I know. I was going to crucify Trudeau over this Russian thing, and I was just, I was loaded for bear tonight. And I never did get to the state of the military I wanted to get to. Let's just say it's getting worse, not better. It's a token force now more than anything. But
and I was reading today that they're gonna announce within weeks Canada's new space force.
Right.
Honest, I'm not making it up.
Is this a Wile E. Coyote kind of space force where you buy a rocket and light it and hope you catch the red rocket?
I know nothing about it. I'm just saying. I read today that's what the announcement is imminent.
Field an Air Force, never mind a space force. Anyway, All right, folks. Thank you for joining Joseph and I tonight. It's been a pleasure having you along for the ride. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. Get out and tell your friends and enemies about this. Let them know we are out here. We need more attention on the net. We need more listeners just like you, because everybody's IQ goes up by 2 points whenever Joseph shows up. So let's make sure that we we promote the show and get more listeners involved. With that, I will bid you all good night. It's been a pleasure. We'll see you all next week. Ubi caritas et amor, Deus ibi est. Good evening. God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace, and may you have a fair wind and a following sea.